The air was thick with the metallic tang of an unfamiliar atmosphere, the kind that clung to the skin and whispered secrets of a world far removed from Earth. The planet's crimson skies swirled with hues of deep maroon and gold, casting an ethereal glow over the barren landscape. In the distance, jagged mountains pierced the horizon like broken teeth, their peaks shrouded in perpetual mist. This was not a place for humans. It was alien, hostile, and breathtakingly beautiful. The soldier stumbled through the terrain, his boots sinking into the fine, ashen soil that crunched beneath his weight. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, scorched from a skirmish he barely survived. Blood trickled down his temple, mingling with sweat as he pressed forward, driven by instinct rather than reason. He had been separated from his unit during the chaos of their mission, a daring infiltration into enemy territory, but now he was alone, adrift in a land that seemed alive with its own pulse. The silence here was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of energy fields shimmering invisibly around him. Every step felt heavier than the last, yet something compelled him onward. A strange pull, almost magnetic, tugged at his chest, urging him toward an unknown destination. He couldn't explain it. Perhaps it was desperation, or maybe some primal force beyond comprehension, but he followed it nonetheless. Through canyons carved by ancient rivers long dried up, past towering monoliths etched with cryptic symbols, he moved, each breath labored but determined. The planet resisted him, its winds howling like banshees, its gravity slightly stronger than what he was accustomed to. Yet still, he pressed on. And then he saw her. She stood atop a dune-like ridge, silhouetted against the fiery sky. Her figure was unmistakably humanoid, yet there was something otherworldly about her presence, an aura of grace and power that made his heart stutter. She wore no armor, no clothing, her form unadorned yet commanding. Her skin shimmered faintly, catching the light in ways that defied logic, as though she were woven from starlight itself. Long, flowing tendrils cascaded down her back, shifting colors with every movement, reflecting the shades of the environment around her. It wasn't until he took another step closer that he realized she hadn't noticed him yet, or if she had, she gave no outward sign. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The soldier's mind raced, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with everything he knew about life beyond Earth. Was this real? Could it be some elaborate hallucination brought on by exhaustion and injury? But no, the longer he stared, the more certain he became. She was flesh and blood, though perhaps not entirely human. There was intelligence in her stance, in the way she held herself, poised and regal even amidst such desolation. As if sensing his thoughts, she turned slowly, deliberately, until their eyes met. And in that instant, everything changed. Her gaze locked onto his, piercing and penetrating, as if she could see straight through him to the very core of his being. Wide, luminous eyes glimmered with a depth that transcended words, holding centuries of wisdom within their irises. They weren't quite human, those eyes, too large, too expressive, framed by lashes that caught the dying sunlight like spun glass. For a fleeting second, panic flickered across her features, raw and unfiltered, before her expression hardened into something unreadable. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her reaction said everything. Fuck. Fear. Curiosity. All these emotions played out silently, written in the subtle shifts of her posture, the tightening of her jaw, the slight tilt of her head. She studied him as intently as he studied her, neither breaking the connection between them. The soldier swallowed hard, suddenly aware of how vulnerable he must appear, dirty, injured, unarmed. Yet there was something about her vulnerability too, standing there exposed under the alien sun, her lack of attire speaking volumes about trust, or perhaps defiance. Neither spoke. Words would have been meaningless anyway, bridging two vastly different worlds. Instead, they communicated through instinct, through the language of bodies and glances. Slowly, cautiously, the soldier raised one hand palm outward, mimicking a gesture of peace he hoped she might understand. Her response was immediate but measured, a single step backward, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft ground. She didn't run, didn't attack, she simply waited, watching him with an intensity that left him breathless. In that suspended moment, surrounded by the eerie beauty of an alien world, the soldier felt something shift inside him. This encounter was more than just survival. It was discovery, wonder, fear, all rolled into one overwhelming tide. Whatever came next, he knew, would change everything. The tension between them stretched thin, fragile as gossamer threads strung taut across an abyss. The soldier dared not move further, acutely aware of how precarious the situation was. One wrong step, one misplaced word, or even a poorly timed blink, and the delicate balance might shatter. His lungs burned with the effort to breathe shallowly, to make himself as non-threatening as possible. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to act, to say something, anything, but he remained rooted to the spot, frozen under her scrutiny. Her earlier shock had given way to something deeper, more complex. He could see it in the way her shoulders relaxed ever so slightly, though her posture remained poised and alert. Her luminous eyes narrowed imperceptibly, studying him with an intensity that bordered on invasive. It wasn't hostility, not exactly, but rather a calculated curiosity, as though she were dissecting him piece by piece without laying a finger on him. The soldier felt exposed, stripped bare not just by her gaze but by the sheer alienness of the moment. Here he was, a mere mortal man, face to face with someone, or something, that defied all logic and understanding. Then came the first sound, a low, melodic hum emanating from her throat. It wasn't speech, not in any conventional sense, but it carried meaning nonetheless. The tone shifted subtly, rising and falling like waves lapping at a shore, each modulation conveying emotion rather than information. The soldier tilted his head slightly, unsure whether to interpret this as a warning or an invitation. Instinctively, he mirrored her, letting out a soft exhale that sounded almost like a sigh. To his surprise, her expression softened fractionally, though her guarded demeanor remained intact. She took another step back, then paused, her movements deliberate and measured. Her bare feet stirred tiny clouds of ash with each motion, leaving faint imprints that quickly filled in behind her. Despite her apparent calm, there was an undercurrent of tension in her body, a coiled readiness that suggested she could bolt at any moment. Yet she stayed, her gaze never wavering from his. It occurred to him then that she might be just as uncertain as he was, though she hid it better beneath layers of composure. A sudden gust of wind swept over the ridge, carrying with it the scent of ozone and something else, something sweet and floral, yet foreign enough to make his stomach churn. She flinched visibly, her arms reflexively crossing over her chest, though whether to shield herself or preserve modesty, he couldn't tell. The action broke the spell momentarily, allowing him to glance away, taking in the full scope of her surroundings. The ridge where she stood seemed almost ceremonial, marked by smooth stones arranged in patterns that hinted at purpose. Beyond it, the landscape fell away into a valley dotted with crystalline formations that refracted the dimming light into prismatic bursts. When he looked back at her, she was staring at him again, her expression unreadable once more. But this time, there was something new in her eyes, a flicker of resolve. Without warning, she extended one arm toward him, palm open and facing upward. The gesture was both familiar and strange, resembling the universal symbol for surrender yet imbued with a nuance he couldn't quite grasp. Her fingers tapered gracefully, ending in nails that gleamed like polished opals. He hesitated, unsure how to respond, until finally, he mirrored the movement, raising his own hand tentatively. Their hands hovered inches apart, neither touching nor retreating. The air between them crackled faintly, charged with an energy that seemed to resonate in his bones. For a fleeting second, he thought he saw her lips part, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't, or wouldn't. Then, just as abruptly, she lowered her arm, turning her attention to the horizon instead. Her profile was striking, almost regal, with high cheekbones and a sharp jawline that spoke of strength tempered by elegance. She exuded a quiet authority, the kind that commanded respect without demanding it. The soldier felt a pang of frustration, coupled with awe. How could he possibly bridge the chasm between them? Language failed him here, rendered useless by the vast gulf of biology, culture, and experience. And yet, despite the impossibility of communication, there was a connection forming. Fragile, yes, but undeniable. It wasn't built on words or shared history but on something far more primal. Mutual curiosity, the instinctive recognition of another sentient being. Time lost all meaning as they stood there, suspended in a liminal space where nothing existed except the two of them and the red-hued expanse stretching endlessly around them. The sun dipped lower, casting elongated shadows that danced across the ground like restless spirits. She shifted her weight slightly, tilting her head toward the fading light, and for the first time, he noticed the intricate markings etched into her skin. They weren't tattoos, exactly. more like veins of liquid metal coursing beneath her surface, glowing faintly with an inner luminescence. Each line followed a pattern too precise to be random, weaving together in loops and swirls that reminded him of constellations. He found himself captivated, unable to look away. There was a symmetry to her design, a harmony that felt almost sacred. She must have sensed his fascination because she glanced at him sharply, her expression inscrutable. For a moment, he feared he'd offended her, violated some unspoken boundary. But then she turned fully toward him, tilting her chin upward in a gesture that seemed both defiant and inviting. Her confidence unnerved him, forcing him to confront the stark contrast between them. She, radiant and unearthly; he, battered and mundane. Yet, despite their differences, there was something profoundly human about her vulnerability. Standing there unadorned, her essence laid bare for him to see, she radiated a quiet dignity that transcended species. It struck him then that this wasn't merely an encounter, it was a collision of worlds, a convergence of paths that had diverged eons ago. What did she think of him? Did she see him as an intruder, a threat? Or was she as fascinated by him as he was by her? The questions swirled in his mind, unanswered and unanswerable. All he could do was stand there, caught in the gravitational pull of her presence, waiting for whatever came next. The soldier's heart thudded in his chest, each beat reverberating through his body like a drum roll signaling an impending storm. He felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration, as though he were perched on the edge of a precipice, teetering between disaster and revelation. The alien princess before him seemed to embody that same duality, both serene and volatile, peaceful yet poised for conflict. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, electric and palpable, binding them together in a web of uncertainty. His gaze flickered involuntarily to her markings again, those shimmering lines that pulsed faintly beneath her translucent skin. They seemed to shift ever so slightly, as though responding to some unseen rhythm. Was it the planet's influence, or something deeper, something intrinsic to her? The question gnawed at him, but he dared not voice it. Instead, he focused on maintaining eye contact, willing himself to project calm despite the turmoil brewing within him. She tilted her head again, this time more deliberately, her luminous eyes narrowing slightly. There was calculation in her stare, a probing intelligence that unsettled him. It was as if she were weighing him, measuring his worth against some invisible standard. The soldier swallowed hard, his throat dry as sandpaper. He wondered if she saw him as insignificant, a speck of dust blown off course, or if there was something in his presence that intrigued her. Either way, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being judged. The wind picked up again, swirling around them in eddies that tugged at his uniform and sent her shimmering tendrils dancing wildly. She didn't flinch this time, standing firm as though the elements themselves bowed to her will. Her composure was unnerving, almost otherworldly, and it made him acutely aware of his own fragility. Here he was, battered and bleeding, while she appeared untouched by the harshness of the environment. It wasn't just physical resilience, he sensed a deeper strength, an indomitable spirit that defied explanation. And then she moved. It was so subtle he almost missed it, a slight shift in her stance, a realignment of her weight that signaled intent. She stepped forward, closing the gap between them by mere inches, but it felt monumental. The soldier's breath hitched, his muscles tensing instinctively. He wanted to retreat, to put distance between them, but his feet refused to obey. Something held him there, rooted to the spot, as though an invisible tether bound him to her. Her hand rose again, slower this time, deliberate and controlled. She reached out, not toward him, but toward the space between them, her fingers splayed wide as if testing the air. The gesture was mesmerizing, hypnotic even, and he found himself mirroring it without conscious thought. Their hands stopped just short of touching, suspended in a moment that stretched endlessly. The energy between them intensified, buzzing like static electricity, making the hairs on his arms stand on end. Her lips parted, and for a heartbeat, he thought she might speak. But no sound emerged. Instead, her expression shifted, softening in a way that caught him off guard. There was warmth there now, a flicker of empathy that cut through the barriers of species and circumstance. It was fleeting, gone almost as soon as it appeared, but it left an indelible mark on him. She wasn't just observing him, she was feeling him, connecting with him on a level that transcended language. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. This wasn't about dominance or submission, aggression or surrender. It was about understanding, about finding common ground in a universe that thrived on division. The soldier felt a surge of hope, fragile yet fierce, blooming in his chest. Perhaps they weren't so different after all. Perhaps, beneath the layers of biology and culture, they shared a fundamental truth: the desire to connect, to belong, to matter. But just as quickly as the thought formed, doubt crept in. What if he misread her entirely? What if her actions were motivated by something darker, something he couldn't comprehend? The ambiguity of the moment weighed heavily on him, pressing down like the planet's gravity. He wanted answers, clarity, resolution, but none of those things were forthcoming. All he had was her, standing before him like a living enigma, her every movement laden with significance. She lowered her hand, breaking the spell once more. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment longer before drifting upward, toward the darkening sky. The sun had nearly vanished now, leaving behind streaks of violet and indigo that painted the horizon in hues of twilight. Stars began to emerge, scattered across the heavens like diamonds spilled onto velvet. She seemed transfixed by the sight, her features illuminated softly by the encroaching night. The soldier followed her gaze, marveling at the beauty of the alien sky. It was breathtaking, yes, but it also filled him with a profound sense of insignificance. Out here, among the stars, humanity's struggles seemed laughably small, inconsequential. And yet, here he was, standing alongside someone who embodied the very essence of the cosmos. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of pride, however misplaced, at having crossed paths with her. When he looked back at her, she was watching him again, her expression softer now, almost tender. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a hint of longing that resonated deeply within him. It occurred to him then that she might be as lonely as he was, adrift in a vast and indifferent universe. The thought brought a lump to his throat, choking off any words he might have tried to form. They stood there in silence, two beings from different worlds bound together by forces neither fully understood. The night deepened around them, wrapping them in its velvety embrace. Somewhere in the distance, a low rumble echoed, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Whether it was natural or mechanical, he couldn't tell, and for the first time, he didn't care. All that mattered was the moment, fragile and fleeting, suspended between them like a thread spun from stardust. And still, the story continued to unfold. The low rumble grew louder, reverberating through the ground with an intensity that made the soldier's knees buckle slightly. He glanced around, searching for its source, but the alien landscape offered no immediate answers. The horizon remained eerily still, save for the faint glimmer of crystalline structures catching the dim starlight. Yet the sound persisted, growing deeper and more resonant, as if the planet itself were stirring awake. The princess reacted instantly, her serene demeanor dissolving into something sharper, more alert. Her head snapped toward the direction of the noise, her glowing eyes narrowing to slits. For the first time since their encounter, she broke her gaze from him entirely, focusing instead on the unseen threat looming beyond the ridge. Her body tensed, every line of her posture radiating readiness. She didn't speak, or hum, or gesture, but her actions spoke volumes. Danger was near. The soldier instinctively reached for the weapon at his side, only to remember it was gone, lost during the skirmish that had separated him from his unit. Panic flared in his chest, but he forced himself to breathe deeply, to think clearly. Whatever was coming, they would face it together, or so he hoped. He turned back to her, seeking some sign of reassurance, some indication that she had a plan. But all he saw was resolve etched into her features, a quiet determination that both inspired and unnerved him. Then, without warning, she moved. Not away from him, but closer, closing the remaining distance between them until their bodies were nearly touching. Her hand shot out again, this time grasping his wrist with surprising strength. Her touch was cool, almost icy, yet electric, sending jolts of sensation coursing through his veins. She pulled him forward, her movements urgent but controlled, guiding him toward the edge of the ridge where the strange markings on the stones seemed to glow faintly under the emerging starlight. He stumbled after her, his mind racing. What did she want? Was she trying to protect him, or use him as a shield? The questions swirled chaotically, but there was no time to dwell on them. The rumbling grew louder still, accompanied now by flashes of light in the distance, pulsating bursts that illuminated the jagged mountains like strobes. Something was approaching, fast, and whatever it wasn't friendly. As they reached the edge of the ridge, she stopped abruptly, releasing his wrist and turning to face him. Her expression was unreadable once more, but her eyes burned with an intensity that left no room for doubt. She needed him to understand. She pointed downward, toward the valley below, where the crystalline formations shimmered faintly. Then she pressed one finger to her lips, mimicking the universal gesture for silence. Her message was clear enough, even if he didn't fully grasp the context. They needed to descend, quickly and quietly. But before he could respond, another sound joined the cacophony, a high-pitched whine that pierced the air like a blade. It came from above, forcing both of them to look up. A shadow passed overhead, blotting out the stars momentarily. The soldier's breath caught in his throat as he caught sight of it, a sleek, angular craft hovering silently against the night sky. Its surface reflected the ambient light, making it appear almost invisible except for the faint outline of its shape. It wasn't human-made, that much was certain. And judging by the way the princess stiffened beside him, it wasn't welcome. The craft descended rapidly, kicking up clouds of ash and debris as it landed several hundred meters away. From its belly emerged figures, tall, spindly beings clad in armor that shimmered like liquid mercury. Their movements were fluid, almost insectoid, as they fanned out in a coordinated search pattern. The soldier felt his stomach drop. These weren't explorers or diplomats. They were hunters, their intent unmistakable. Beside him, the princess let out a soft hiss, her body coiling like a spring. She glanced at him briefly, her luminous eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. Then, without hesitation, she grabbed his arm again and yanked him down the slope, moving with a speed and agility that defied belief. He struggled to keep up, his boots slipping on loose soil as they descended into the valley. Each step jarred his injured shoulder, sending waves of pain shooting through his body, but he gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Survival depended on it. The crystalline formations loomed ahead, their prismatic surfaces casting fractured reflections across the terrain. As they neared, the princess slowed, scanning the area with meticulous precision. She released his arm and crouched low, gesturing for him to do the same. He obeyed, dropping to his knees and peering over the edge of a large crystal shard. Below, the valley opened into a labyrinth of jagged rocks and narrow crevices, offering potential hiding spots, if they could reach them in time. She tapped his shoulder lightly, drawing his attention. When he looked at her, she pointed to her ear, then to the ground, mouthing something inaudible. He nodded slowly, understanding her meaning. Listen, stay low, move carefully. Together, they began navigating the treacherous terrain, weaving between the crystals with calculated precision. Every snap of a twig, every scrape of gravel against stone, felt deafening in the oppressive silence. Behind them, the hunters' voices carried faintly, strange guttural sounds that sent shivers down the soldier's spine. They were communicating, coordinating their efforts with eerie efficiency. He risked a glance backward, catching sight of their silhouettes against the distant glow of their ship. They were spreading out, methodically combing the area. Time was running out. Suddenly, the princess froze, her hand shooting out to stop him mid-step. Her head tilted upward, ears twitching imperceptibly. She must have heard something. He couldn't hear anything over the pounding of his own heart, but her reaction was immediate. She dropped flat to the ground, pulling him down with her. They lay there, pressed against the cold earth, as the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. The soldier held his breath, his pulse hammering in his ears. Through the gaps in the crystal formations, he could see one of the hunters passing within meters of their position. Its elongated limbs moved with predatory grace, its head swiveling as it scanned the area. For a moment, it paused, tilting its helmeted skull as though sensing something amiss. Then, just as suddenly, it resumed its patrol, disappearing into the shadows. Only when the footsteps faded completely did the princess release her grip on him. She exhaled softly, her shoulders sagging slightly with relief. But there was no time to rest. She rose to her feet, motioning for him to follow. They continued their descent, moving faster now, driven by adrenaline and desperation. The labyrinth grew denser, the passages narrower, until they were forced to crawl on hands and knees to navigate the tight spaces. Finally, they reached what appeared to be a natural alcove, partially concealed by a cluster of sharp-edged crystals. The princess slipped inside, beckoning him to join her. Once they were both hidden, she pressed herself against the wall, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her glowing eyes darted toward the entrance, watching for any sign of pursuit. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were their labored breathing and the distant hum of the hunter's equipment. The soldier leaned back against the rocky surface, closing his eyes as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. His body ached, his wounds throbbing in protest, but he forced himself to stay alert. He couldn't afford to collapse. Not now, not when survival hung in the balance. When he opened his eyes again, the princess was staring at him, her expression softer than before. There was gratitude there, mingled with something else, something that looked suspiciously like admiration. She reached out hesitantly, her fingers brushing against his cheek in a gesture that startled him. Her touch was gentle, almost reverent, and it sent a shiver coursing through his body. Then, just as suddenly, she withdrew her hand, her gaze flickering back toward the entrance. The hunters were still out there, relentless in their pursuit. But for the briefest of moments, the soldier allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they stood a chance. Together. The soldier held her gaze, searching for answers in the depths of her luminous eyes. There was something unspoken between them now, a fragile thread of trust woven from shared peril. Her earlier touch lingered on his skin like an electric charge, grounding him even as uncertainty loomed heavy in the air. He wanted to ask her what came next. Was this hiding place safe? Could they evade their pursuers indefinitely? But words felt futile here, clumsy and inadequate against the vast chasm of language and understanding that separated them. Instead, he nodded once, silently conveying his readiness to follow her lead. She seemed to understand, inclining her head slightly before turning her attention back to the narrow opening of their makeshift sanctuary. The hunters' movements echoed faintly in the distance, growing louder by degrees. They were systematic, thorough, closing in with mechanical precision. Time was slipping away, grain by grain, and the soldier could feel it slipping through his fingers like sand. The princess shifted suddenly, crouching lower and pressing one hand against the rocky wall behind them. Her other hand gestured toward the ground, then upward, mimicking climbing motions. He frowned, unsure at first, but when she pointed to a jagged fissure above their heads, realization dawned. Escape wasn't possible here. They needed elevation. The crevice led upward, twisting into darkness, offering both concealment and mobility if they dared to take the risk. She didn't wait for his consent. With fluid grace, she hoisted herself onto the first ledge, her bare feet finding purchase on the rough stone. She paused briefly, glancing down at him with an expectant expression. The message was clear: move or be left behind. Summoning every ounce of strength, the soldier followed, his muscles screaming in protest as he pulled himself up after her. Each step was precarious, the narrow path slick with moisture and sharp-edged rocks threatening to slice open his palms. Yet he pressed on, driven not just by survival but by the unwavering presence of the alien princess ahead of him. As they ascended, the sounds of the hunters grew muffled, swallowed by the labyrinthine passages surrounding them. The air grew cooler, tinged with the metallic scent of minerals embedded in the rock walls. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered within him, the possibility that they might actually outrun their pursuers. But the thought was short-lived. A sudden burst of light illuminated the tunnel below, accompanied by harsh, guttural voices echoing off the stone. The hunters had found their trail. The princess reacted instantly, grabbing his wrist and pulling him forward with renewed urgency. They climbed faster now, scrambling over jagged outcroppings and squeezing through tight spaces that scraped against their bodies. Every movement was calculated, every decision born of instinct honed by desperation. Still, the soldier couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded, funneled toward some predetermined endgame. Were the hunters aware of where this passage led? Or were they simply following blindly, relying on superior numbers and technology? At last, they emerged into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow and its floor littered with crystalline shards that refracted the dim light into dazzling patterns. In the center of the room stood a massive obelisk-like structure, pulsating faintly with an inner glow. It hummed softly, resonating in harmony with the planet itself. The princess froze upon seeing it, her entire body going rigid. She stared at the monolith with an intensity that bordered on reverence, her glowing markings flaring brightly in response to its energy. The soldier hesitated, torn between awe and unease. Something about the obelisk felt ancient, sacred, a relic of a civilization far older than either of them. Was it a weapon, a beacon, or something else entirely? Before he could form another question, the princess stepped forward, placing one hand against its smooth surface. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the chamber and reverberating in his chest. Light spilled outward in waves, bathing the space in hues of gold and crimson. Then she turned to him, her expression unreadable yet charged with purpose. She extended her hand toward him, palm up, as though inviting him to join her. He hesitated, his mind racing. What did she want from him? Did she believe he could help activate whatever power lay dormant within the obelisk? Or was this a test, a final measure of his worthiness? The sound of approaching footsteps snapped his indecision. The hunters were close now, their shadows spilling into the chamber. Without further hesitation, the soldier reached out, placing his hand atop hers on the obelisk's surface. The moment their skin touched, a surge of energy coursed through him, blinding and overwhelming. Images flooded his mind, visions of stars collapsing, galaxies forming, civilizations rising and falling, all seen through her eyes. He gasped, staggering backward as the weight of it threatened to consume him. But the princess remained steadfast, her grip firm as she anchored him to reality. Together, they channeled the obelisk's power, unleashing a wave of radiant light that engulfed the chamber. The hunters cried out, their forms dissolving into static before vanishing completely. The ship above shuddered violently, its engine sputtering as it was pulled inexorably downward, crashing into the horizon with a deafening roar. When the light faded, silence fell. The soldier collapsed to his knees, trembling from the aftershocks of the connection. The princess knelt beside him, her glowing eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. For the first time since their encounter, she spoke, or rather, sang. Her voice was melodic, hauntingly beautiful, weaving emotions and meaning without the need for translation. It was a song of gratitude, of farewell, of promise. He didn't fully understand, but he felt it in his soul. Whatever bond had formed between them transcended worlds, defying logic and reason. As she rose to her feet and stepped away from him, he knew their paths would diverge, but not truly part. They had changed each other, irrevocably and forever. And as the crimson sky bled into dawn, casting its eternal glow over the alien landscape, the soldier realized that survival was no longer enough. This moment, this connection, had given him something far greater, a glimpse of the infinite.